Is it true that the vaccination requirement is still in effect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Interesting. Is there anywhere else in the country where that's still the case?
I don't know, Your Honor.
Now, would the vaccine mandate that is currently in place be satisfied by just having the initial two-shot sequence back in 2020 or 2021?
Yes,
And with nothing further since then?
no boosters is
Okay.
my understanding.
It's not so there's no booster required?
Exactly.
Okay.
May it please the court, I'm Connie Michaels from the Littler Mendelsohn Law Firm, and I represent the superintendent, chief human resource officer, and board members of the Los Angeles Unified School District, which is in fact a public school district. It is the second largest in the country. It's our position that this case is absolutely controlled by Jacobson and the many, many, many cases after it that have dealt with vaccine mandates and COVID-related restrictions. Everyone from Biden versus Missouri.
Let me address the concern I have about this case, which I think is unique among all the cases we have
Certainly,
this
Your Honor.
morning, and that is the breadth of Judge Fisher's decision. Because so far as I'm aware, this is the only decision that holds that under Jacobson, it doesn't matter if the vaccine does not prevent transmission of the disease. Because she addressed that concern, and she said plaintiff's reliance on this distinction is misplaced. Jacobson does not require that a vaccine have the specific purpose of preventing disease. And then she just upheld it as essentially as mandatory medical treatment. But that seems not Jacobson, and it does seem to be Glucksberg. And so this rationale and this decision seems to me to be clearly wrong. Tell me why you disagree.
I do disagree, Your Honor, for a number of reasons. The cases that have been relied upon by opposing counsel, these bodily integrity cases, deal with situations where the forced medical procedure involved literally injecting people and other types of treatment and the like. Here, we're dealing with a condition of employment. It has long been a condition of employment at LA Unified.
But do you agree that it's legally irrelevant whether or not the vaccines prevent transmission?
I believe that under the current state of the law, courts have not made that distinction in the sense that it's
But
made a difference.
that's not Jacobson, because Jacobson rests on the principle of vaccination as a means to prevent the spread of smallpox. The whole rationale, and you go to the concluding part of Justice Harlan's opinion, is this idea that you're going to defy the mandate and infect others. That's the whole scenario of Jacobson. But you're coming here and saying, no, we have a right to condition employment on you conducting your medical treatment the way we like. That's not Jacobson. That's something really different.
Your Honor, similar arguments have been asserted in other cases around the country.
But have they been adopted by any other court?
No, I didn't find any other court that adopted the medical treatment type
But let
concern.
me ask you this. I mean, you don't need that broad of an interpretation of Jacobson to win the case, correct?
I agree. It's a rational basis. That
Well,
is all we
but-
have to prove, and
but-
that the, I'm so sorry, Your
But
Honor.
Jacobson won't apply if your position is to concede that the vaccines don't prevent transmission. I mean, and that was, it's alleged in the complaint, and this was done on the pleadings, that they don't. And there's a fair amount of science at this point that their ability to prevent transmission is of a very limited window and expires. And yet, you're willing to accept someone who had a vaccine 2 years ago, who clearly has no ability to prevent transmission, and yet today, this doesn't fit Jacobson, and it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
Well, to be clear, I'm not conceding that vaccines don't help with respect to transmission. And currently today, you do have to have had the vaccines in order to be currently working at LA Unified.
But what's the basis? I mean, I guess the question is there any rational basis to say that you had to have the vaccine 3 years ago now to continue working?
Well, first of all,
Is that the question we're supposed to answer now?
well, I think the real question that you're answering now is to see if there is a rational relationship, and in order to start that, you have to see the fundamental right.
I
And-
mean, what if we're here 20 years from now, and the LA is, still requiring a whole new generation, the LA school district is requiring a whole new generation to get a vaccine? Wouldn't we say, wait, you can't do that, there's no current threat?
Your Honor, there is no fundamental right here simply because you're supposed to allow the state, in this case the district, and give them the discretion to figure that they knew the different sides of the debate and
That's
that.
that's not my question. What happened in 2020 happened in 2020. Here we have a situation where you're still imposing this requirement. And so, I mean, at some point, the rational basis starts to wane. And I mean, even under rational basis, I think we all agree that rational basis applies here. Well, plaintiff doesn't, but even assuming rational basis, at some point, it starts to wane. And I guess the question is whether you've come outside of Jacobson by prolonging it, this long.
I don't believe we have, Your Honor, because you have to keep in mind we're dealing with a school with a very, very large population that is impacted, a huge population in LA County. You have a
But
school.
you could make that same argument 20 years from now, 5 years from now.
Well, Your Honor, they're still requiring smallpox vaccines in the school district. I mean, there's a number of vaccines. But I do want to make the point that without agreeing and conceding to it, even if it was a medical treatment, I believe that there's a rational basis with respect to that. Because
Bloxburg suggests that if it's medical treatment, that there is a fundamental right, because it talks about the right recognized in Cruzan and says, given the common law rule that forced medication was a battery and the long legal tradition protecting the decision to refuse unwanted medical treatment, our assumption that it was a fundamental right in Cruzan, our assumption was entirely consistent with this nation's history and constitutional traditions, which is the standard that Dobbs applies for substantive due process. So if you're redefining, that's why I think this is so important. If you're saying it's medical treatment, you're out of Jacobson, and it seems to me you're in the Glucksberg fundamental right, and it's strict scrutiny.
first of all, we're not conceding that it's medical treatment, but even if we were, for purposes of this argument, because it's a school district, it is important that vaccine, even if it was just something that helped with respect to treatment, the reason it's important is because we want the students to be able to go to school and stay in school. So if this treatment is
Are the
such that it
students
shortens the
subject to a
time that
vaccine?
someone is ill,
Are the students subject to a vaccine mandate?
they're not now.
So most of the people in the building are unvaccinated, but this handful of people have to be vaccinated. And that would pass, are you claiming that would pass strict scrutiny if we found strict scrutiny were applicable?
I don't believe it's strict scrutiny, Your Honor. Bear in mind that many of these students couldn't get vaccinated. They weren't able to do so because of their age and the vaccines that were available. So we're talking about a point in time where the district made the decision that in order to protect the staff, the students, and the community at large, they were going to follow the guidance of the government and the CDC and the various local state authorities and decide that vaccines were in fact a device to help prevent the spread of this particular disease.
Okay, again, that's fine in 2020, but what about today? What's the justification for keeping this going? I mean, we've had every other attorney in here saying there's no way we would require vaccines again today. You couldn't get away with it. And you're up here standing here saying, no, this is completely common sense. We could keep doing, under your theory, we could keep this in place for the next 20 years.
Well, first of all, Your Honor, that's nothing that was briefed. I don't believe it's actually before the court. I'm not certainly suggesting that it goes on forever, but we do know, for example, that there are COVID spikes right now. So I can't
Well,
reveal.
you're
because-
certainly undermining the mootness argument for every other case that's been out here.
The problem I have, and that's why I started with the question I did, there's no rational basis for believing that someone who got a two-shot sequence in 2021, in March, say, of 2021, has any protection against transmission now in September of 2023. There's just, seems to me to be irrational. Even the CDC does not claim that a shot sequence 2.5 years ago provides immunity against what's circulating today. And so that person is exempted, even though they have absolutely no, so this just seems completely arbitrary.
Well, Your Honor, again, I don't believe that the issue of today as opposed to what happened previously is really the issue that's
But
been
it's your
briefed before
policy.
the
Your
court.
policy today is a vax mandate that is satisfied by a shot 2.5 years ago. That's not rational.
Well, in fact, no one that hasn't been vaccinated, not just with respect to COVID, but with a list of different immunizations is allowed to come on board. And that's just, it's a universal rule. It's applied to everyone.
Because the other things like mumps and measles, the vaccines prevent transmission for extended periods of time, and there's a scientific basis for that. They've alleged that the vaccines don't prevent transmission. The CDC concedes that after a period of time, they don't prevent transmission, and yet you're insisting on it still.
Well, Your Honor, we're very concerned about maintaining the health of our staff, and until it's absolutely established that the vaccines have no effect.
And the fact that 99% of, or maybe 99.9% of government bodies aren't requiring mandates anymore isn't enough to establish for you? I mean, I'm honestly shocked by your argument.
I understand, Your Honor. With respect to what the district's going to do now or what they're considering doing now, there's only so much I can tell you because it's not in the record. But with respect to the vaccination requirement, they have felt that until it is established that the vaccine is not of use in any way, that it's important to go ahead and maintain it. And if, in fact, it is a treatment, as has been suggested, or has any ability
So the
to
district
keep...
is saying that in order to lift the mandate, which is in effect right now, one would have to establish that the vaccine doesn't work at all?
One would have to establish whether there are other means, because the test, when we're dealing out of a rational basis, has to do with how narrow it is. And so here, we would have to see, is the vaccine, in fact, the best tool at any particular time, given the particular ability of the vaccines and the particular variants that exist with respect to COVID.
You point to any other government body, school board, state, city, fire department, anything that is taking this position. I mean, I didn't understand this going into this case. I'm really floored by this argument.
Well, we certainly have the Indiana University, Norris versus Indiana University case, where they came up with the same decision and decided that there's no fundamental basis to employment. And if you didn't follow their particular rules, and this is decided in July of 2023, that you could go ahead and work somewhere else or go somewhere else.
Let me go around this argument just a bit. My colleague, Judge Collins, has pointed to the statement by Judge Fisher in the opinion that it does not matter how effective the vaccine would be. You know what he's referring to.
I'm so sorry, could you repeat that?
Okay. The statement apparently in the district court's opinion that the vaccine mandate, still in effect, would be upheld even if the vaccine was ineffective completely, to paraphrase. Is it possible, here's my question that I'm getting to, is it possible to affirm the district court and disapprove of that language?
Under the rational basis statement, I don't believe there is. I don't believe Jacobson made the type of distinction between treatment and transmission, and it has not been discussed in the cases
Where
since
did
then.
Judge Fisher come up with this? Do you know?
I-
Did the school district argue to Judge Fisher that it's irrelevant whether the vaccine works at all?
I don't believe that was briefed, Your Honor. I
Okay.
don't believe that had come up with us. She was
Thank you.
strictly, I believe she was strictly following Jacobson and its progeny after that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You have rebuttal.